You've got the hands of a craftsman, Julian, but your sister has the mind of a businesswoman. My father said that to me, right before he handed her the keys to my life's work. I didn't argue. I just packed my knives, walked out, and let her run the business. It took her less than a year to drive it completely into the ground. Turns out, she didn't have much of a business mind either. I'm 32 years old, and for the last decade, I've smelled constantly of vanilla extract, yeast, and roasted nuts. My family owned Evergreen Confections. When my parents first bought it, it was just a struggling neighborhood bakery. I was the one who transformed it into a high-end patisserie and catering service. Over 8 years, I built a menu and a standard of quality that secured contracts with 5-star hotels, luxury wedding planners, and corporate events. My alarm went off at 3 a.m. every single day. While the city was still dark, I was in a hot, windless kitchen. Baking at a professional level isn't just following instructions, it's a precise, unforgiving science. It's understanding how the morning's humidity will affect the macaron batter, or how a 2-degree shift in temperature can ruin an entire batch of tempered chocolate. I laminated dough by hand, developed every original recipe, and trained our prep cooks. I gave up my 20s for that kitchen. I didn't date, I didn't travel, and my social life was non-existent because the ovens couldn't wait. My sister, Chloe, was 27. She couldn't tell the difference between bread flour and cornstarch if her life depended on it, but she didn't need to. Chloe was the director of client relations. She wore crisp, tailored suits and spent her days taking clients out to expensive lunches on the company card. She worked maybe 25 hours a week. Her main job was bringing platters of my pastries to tasting meetings, sitting back and graciously accepting the compliments as if she had baked them herself. Here is the part where I admit how foolish I was. I worked 70 to 80 hours a week for exactly $45,000 a year. In our city, an executive pastry chef running a high-volume, high-end kitchen should easily clear $100,000. Meanwhile, Chloe took home $50,000 for part-time work and long lunches. Whenever I brought up the pay gap, my father always had a prepared speech. Chloe is the face of the company. She brings in the contracts. You're building equity, Julian. We keep the overhead low now so the business can grow. Everything you're doing is an investment. Someday, this will all be yours. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my father, and I was the dutiful son. I thought every early morning, every burn scar on my forearms, and every missed holiday was simply a down payment on my future. I had no idea they were just using me to keep the lights on.
The kitchen was finally quiet. It was past 9 p.m., the ovens were off, and the only sound was the low, steady hum of the walk-in refrigerators. I was staying late to do the weekly inventory and needed to print out the invoices for our flour and sugar suppliers. To print, I had to use the main computer in my father's cramped office upstairs. He usually locked the door when he left, but that night it was left slightly ajar. The computer monitor was glowing in the dark room. When I sat down to open the printing folder, I noticed his email inbox was left open. I wasn't in the habit of snooping through my father's messages, but my eyes caught a subject line from our family's corporate lawyer. It read, "Draft, Evergreen Succession and Restructuring." My hand hovered over the mouse. A heavy, sinking feeling settled in my stomach. I clicked the attachment. It was a 40-page legal document outlining the future of the company. According to the contract, effective upon my father's retirement next year, 100% of Evergreen Confections would be transferred to Chloe. She was to be named sole owner and CEO. There was no mention of a partnership. There were no shares set aside for me. In the eyes of the paperwork, I was listed plainly under current staff. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. Attached to the legal draft was an email chain between my father, Chloe, and the lawyer discussing the transition. I scrolled down to a section labeled Operational Cost Reductions. Chloe had written a detailed paragraph. Julian is our highest labor expense, and his insistence on premium ingredients cuts into our profit margins. Once the ownership transfer is complete, we need a transition period of about 3 months. During that time, we will require him to formally document all his proprietary recipes into a company database. Once we have the standard operating procedures secured, we can let him go and hire a standard production baker for half the cost. I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over again. Let him go. Standard production baker, half the cost. Then I read my father's reply. Agreed. Let's handle it quietly. He has a good resume. He'll find work somewhere else. They weren't just passing me over for ownership. They were actively conspiring to steal the recipes I had spent a decade perfecting and then fire me from the very kitchen I had built, all to save money for Chloe's new management plan. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. The anger I felt wasn't explosive. It was freezing cold. I looked down at my hands in the dim light of the monitor. They were rough, scarred with old burns from hot baking sheets, and permanently calloused from kneading dough. I had sacrificed my youth for this place. I'd missed weddings, birthdays, and normal weekends, believing I was building a future for my family. Instead, I was just a cheap workhorse they planned to put down the moment they got what they needed. I hit the print button. I listened to the machine churn out 3 pages of the email chain. I took the papers, folded them neatly, and slid them into my jacket pocket. Then I closed the tabs, shut down the computer, and walked out into the cold night air. My entire reality had shifted, and they didn't even know it yet.
I waited until Thanksgiving. It seemed fitting. We were at my parents' house. The dining room was warm, filled with the smell of roasted turkey and the 3 pies I had baked that morning. My mother was pouring coffee, my father was talking about a wine he was trying, and Chloe was scrolling through her phone complaining about how tiring her recent networking trip to Miami had been. It was a picture of a perfectly normal family. I waited for a lull in the conversation. Then I reached into my jacket, pulled out the folded pages, and placed them flat in the center of the table. I needed to print some flour invoices from the office computer last week, I said, my voice steady. I found these instead. My father leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. The color drained from his face the second he recognized the email header. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing before he finally settled on defensive anger. "You were snooping through my private emails?" he asked, completely ignoring the content of the pages. "I wasn't snooping. You left them open on the main screen. Care to explain why I'm reading about my own termination and the theft of my recipes in a legal draft?" My mother stopped pouring the coffee. "Termination? Arthur, what is he talking about?" Chloe didn't look guilty. She just looked annoyed, like I had interrupted her schedule. She set her phone face down on the table. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Julian. It's a contingency plan, a business strategy." "A strategy to fire me after I hand over the recipes I spent a decade creating?" "You're an employee of Evergreen," said Chloe smoothly, using her corporate meeting voice. "Whatever you create in that kitchen belongs to the company. And frankly, your labor costs are too high. You're too stubborn about using expensive ingredients. Any decent baker can follow a recipe once it's written down. The real value of the company is client management and logistics. That's what I do." I looked at my father. "And you agree with this? You're handing the business to someone who doesn't even know how to turn on the commercial ovens?" My father sighed, rubbing his temples. "Julian, try to understand. The bakery needs a leader with commercial vision. You're a craftsman. You get too attached to the process. Chloe understands margins. We were going to offer you a generous severance when the time came." There it was. No apologies, no guilt. They genuinely believed that my skills, the early mornings, the burned hands, and the years of loyalty were just commodities they could discard when they became too expensive. They thought the high-end pastries just magically appeared on the trays, ready for Chloe to sell. A strange sense of calm washed over me. The anger was gone, replaced by a sharp, absolute clarity. "You think anyone can just mix flour and sugar?" I said quietly, looking directly at my sister. "It's just mixing flour and sugar, Julian. It's not rocket science," Chloe scoffed. I nodded slowly. I stood up from my chair and tossed my napkin on the table. "You're right," I said. "It's just business, which means I don't owe you my recipes and I don't owe you my loyalty. Good luck with your margins, Chloe."
Sit down, Julian. Don't act like a child. We can negotiate a proper exit package. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I walked out the front door, got into my car, and drove away in the cold. I never sat at that dining table again.
I didn't rage quit that night. If I had walked away right then, I would have left empty-handed. Instead, I went into work on Monday at 3 a.m., tied my apron, and started proofing the croissant dough just like always. I played the part of the defeated employee perfectly. I let my father think his business strategy had won. But behind the scenes, I was quietly dismantling the foundation of the bakery. First, I secured my intellectual property. The recipes that made Evergreen famous weren't saved on any company computer. They lived in 3 worn leather-bound notebooks I kept on a shelf above my prep station. 10 years of precise measurements, temperature adjustments, and flavor profiles. Over the course of a week, I quietly took them home. When Chloe eventually sent an email reminding me to start documenting my work for the company database, I stalled, claiming we were too busy with the spring orders. Next, I made some phone calls. High-end baking relies heavily on the quality of ingredients. Over the years, I had built strong relationships with specialty purveyors, the family that imported our organic Tahitian vanilla, the small batch chocolate roaster, the local dairy farm that supplied our high-fat butter. I called them one by one. I didn't badmouth my family. I simply told them I was leaving Evergreen to start my own atelier. Their responses were almost identical. Julian, we do business with you because you actually respect the product. Your sister only ever calls to ask for bulk discounts. When you open your doors, our deliveries go to you. My final and most crucial meeting was with Vincent. Vincent was the food and beverage director for the St. Clair, a 5-star hotel downtown. They were Evergreen's largest and most prestigious account, representing nearly 40% of our total revenue. I met him for coffee on my afternoon off. I kept it professional. I told him my time at Evergreen was ending and I was securing a commercial kitchen space of my own. Vincent took a sip of his espresso and looked at me. Julian, let's be honest. For the last 2 years, the only reason I haven't dropped Evergreen is because of what comes out of your ovens. Your sister's meetings are a waste of my time. Send me the new contract the day you open. St. Clair goes where you go. With my supply chain secured and my biggest client ready to jump ship, all that was left was the timing. In the catering industry, the first week of May is the beginning of the gauntlet. It's the start of the summer wedding season. Evergreen was booked solid, with 4 high-profile weddings and a corporate gala scheduled for the upcoming weekend. On Thursday afternoon, right after I finished the prep work for the next morning's bake, I stayed back in the empty kitchen. I packed my personal canvas knife roll. I gathered my specialized silicone molds, my calibrated thermometers, and my heavy copper pots, tools I had bought with my own money over the years. I packed them into 2 large boxes and loaded them into my trunk. At 4 p.m., I walked upstairs to the office. My father was at his desk, sorting through invoices. Chloe wasn't there. I placed a single sheet of paper on his desk. "What's this?" he asked, barely glancing at it. "My resignation," I said, effective immediately. Today was my last shift. His head snapped up. The casual annoyance on his face rapidly shifted to sheer panic. "You can't be serious. Julian, we have the Patterson wedding on Saturday, a 5-tier cake. We have the charity gala. You can't just leave without notice." "You've got a kitchen full of ingredients and a daughter with commercial vision," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly flat. "I'm sure the new CEO can figure it out." "Julian, wait, let's talk about this." I didn't wait. I walked down the stairs, out the back door of the kitchen, and into the late afternoon sun. My phone started ringing before I even put the key in the ignition. I turned it on silent, drove away, and finally took a deep breath. For the first time in 10 years, my future actually belonged to me.
I spent my first free weekend in a decade sleeping past 3 a.m. Meanwhile, Evergreen Confections was falling apart. I didn't need to be there to see it. Mateo, my former prep cook, called me every evening with the casualty reports. Friday morning was pure panic. Chloe marched into the kitchen at dawn, demanding the crew start the morning bake. That was when she realized my recipe books were actually gone. Desperate, she pulled generic recipes off the internet. When the pastries didn't look right, she blamed the staff. She ordered Mateo to use cheap compound chocolate instead of taking the time to temper the real couverture, telling him they needed to speed up production. The results looked dull and tasted like sweet wax. They had to refund a dozen orders by noon. But the real disaster happened on Saturday, the Patterson wedding. They had ordered a massive 5-tier lemon elderflower cake. Building a pastry structure that size is an architectural project. It requires internal dowels and support boards to distribute the weight. Chloe, playing kitchen manager, saw the dowels on the prep table and told the crew to skip them. It takes too long to measure and cut them, and it's just cake. It'll hold itself up, she insisted. Mateo tried to warn her, but she pulled rank. They delivered the cake to the country club. During the reception, the warm room softened the buttercream. Without internal support, the bottom tier slowly buckled. Right before the bride and groom entered the hall, the top 3 tiers violently slid off, crashing onto the polished floor in a heavy pile of ruined cake and frosting. The bride wept in the hallway. The family demanded a full refund and threatened legal action for ruining the event. If Saturday was an embarrassment, Tuesday was a liability. Evergreen was catering a corporate gala for a tech firm. The menu included a hazelnut tart and a strict nut-free alternative. In a professional kitchen, allergy protocols are absolute. You use separate stations, separate tools, and sanitize everything. Chloe didn't know that. She saw the kitchen falling behind schedule and told the understaffed crew to use the same prep tables to plate both desserts simultaneously. She ignored the risk of cross-contamination just to save 20 minutes of cleaning time. Halfway through the dinner service, a senior executive ate the nut-free option. 10 minutes later, his throat started swelling shut. The music stopped, and the event grounded to a halt as paramedics rushed into the ballroom to administer an EpiPen and load him onto a stretcher. In the high-end catering world, you don't need a bad review on the internet to sink your business. Word of mouth is swift and unforgiving. The collapsed wedding cake made Evergreen a joke. The ambulance made them a danger. By Thursday afternoon, the reality of Chloe's management set in. Vincent called my father and formally terminated the St. Clair hotel contract, citing severe health and safety violations. Word spread through the tight-knit network of luxury event planners. Within 48 hours, 3 other major clients canceled their summer contracts and demanded their deposits back. Chloe's brilliant business strategy had taken less than a week to turn a decade of my hard work into a sinking ship, and the water was pouring in fast.
The collapse was swift and absolute. Without the St. Clair hotel contract and the steady stream of wedding planners, Evergreen Confections couldn't even make payroll. The lawsuits from the allergic reaction and the ruined wedding cake drained whatever cash reserves they had left. My father tried taking out a second mortgage on his house to keep the lights on, but it was like pouring water into a sinking ship. Exactly 6 months after I walked out, the bank padlocked the doors. Meanwhile, I opened Julian's Atelier in a clean, modest commercial space across town. I didn't need a fancy storefront with marble counters. Vincent brought the St. Clair account with him on day 1. My old suppliers extended me lines of credit based entirely on my reputation. By my 3rd month, I was turning away clients and hiring 2 assistant bakers just to keep up with the demand. In late November, Evergreen's remaining assets were liquidated at a public commercial auction to pay off their creditors. I decided to go. It was surreal walking into that drafty warehouse, seeing the ovens I had carefully cleaned, the stainless steel prep tables I had scrubbed every night, all tagged with numbered stickers. I stood quietly at the back of the room. When my favorite 60-quart Hobart stand mixer came up for bidding, the exact machine I had used to mix thousands of batches of dough, I raised my paddle. I bought it back for 10 cents on the dollar. As I was signing the paperwork for the freight pickup, my father approached me. He looked 10 years older. His shoulders slumped, his suit looked slightly too big for him, and the sharp, confident businessman I knew was completely gone. "Julian," he said, his voice thin and cracking, "please." I didn't answer. I just looked at him. "We're losing the house," he continued, his eyes pleading. "Your mother is sick with the stress. We have nothing left. But you have the clients. You have the recipes. We could partner up. You can have full control. Chloe is out. Just help us save the family." I looked at the man who secretly sat in his office and planned to strip me of my life's work just to save a few dollars. I expected to feel angry or maybe even vindicated, but I only felt a profound, quiet emptiness. "I already have full control, Dad," I said, gently, and I don't need to save a business that I already rebuilt on my own. Julian, please, we're family, he begged, reaching a hand out. I stepped back. You sat at the Thanksgiving table and told me it was just business. You said I was just a craftsman and the company needed a businessman. I picked up my auction receipt. It's a shame Chloe turned out to be neither. I turned and walked out into the crisp autumn air, leaving him standing alone among the rusted, auctioned pieces of his broken company. Today, Julian's Atelier is the premier supplier for luxury catering in the city. I own my recipes, I dictate my own hours, and I finally pay myself what I'm actually worth. My parents eventually had to file for bankruptcy, sell their home, and move into a small, cramped apartment. They live quietly on what is left of my father's pension. As for Chloe, the brilliant corporate strategist who was supposed to elevate the company, last I heard, she is working the night shift as an assistant manager at a chain convenience store. It turns out, when you take away the people who actually do the work, the only thing she knows how to manage is a cash register.